Thanks so much for that, Miggy. That was super, super interesting. I'll open it up for questions. Does anyone have a question for Miggy?
Questions.
I have a question
Okay.
myself.
Uh-huh.
So I assume you've returned to writing more choral music as of recently,
Mm-hmm.
because of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested to hear, if you want to share. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
it's more about the individuality of the artist, as you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
But what kind of creative processes you've been exploring, trying
Yeah,
out for choral music?
absolutely. Well, for the first thing is questioning the idea of being a choral composer. So the last choral piece that I wrote was the fractured identity of the millennial. And because I don't like the idea of saying, I'm going to write a choral piece and then trying to shoehorn whatever you have into that mold, but rather having an idea and then saying, the best way of expressing this is through a choir or through a group of people at least. And maybe they don't sing. Maybe it's narration, or maybe it's more theatrical, or maybe the way that you're dividing up the choir isn't by register. Maybe it's by timbre. Maybe it's by the people who have lighter voices and darker voices, or something like that. You know what I mean? I guess, let me think. Something more specific. I've been exploring also, I guess, like writing your own text, I think is really important, which is something that a lot of people do, but a lot of people don't do. And I don't understand. Like, okay, so there was this presentation that we had a couple years ago by this DMA student who was also a very, very interested in choral music, and he was talking about how he would spend a lot of time looking for the right text. He would spend like months looking for the right text before writing a piece, and that made me really uncomfortable. Just because you're gonna waste 3 months looking for something that expresses an idea that you already know what it is, but you're just hoping that another artist has said that in a way that you like, so that you can then go and decorate that work of art. So I don't know, maybe that's a really jaded way of thinking about it, but basically my explorations have been really questioning, you know, I don't know. You can look at all these interviews of tons of composers, and they start to say the same sorts of things. It's thinking about that and then questioning all those things. And I think I'm still in the process of processing and unpacking everything. So I feel like I'm still in this pre-compositional mode for the next choral piece that I write, where I'm still just I'm kind of just coming out of this like choral high and trying to figure out like what everything is. Also, like, electronics is really important to me. Like, I feel like, so a lot of choral composers are really obsessed with performances. They're obsessed with getting a certain number of performances. And I think one of the reasons is because the choral sphere is one of the only places left in classical music where you can really make money and make a living being a choral composer. So if you're trying to do that, the biggest sources of income for you to do that are, number one, performances, i.e. octavo sales and royalties, and number two is commissions. And so if that's kind of your guiding light, you become obsessed with number of performances. And for me, I feel like, well, Partita for Eight Voices won the Pulitzer with one performance, which is the performance on the recording. How many times does that piece get performed? I mean, it gets performed surprisingly often for a piece that I think a lot of people before it won the Pulitzer would have said, that's too hard, that's too weird, I'm not going to do it. But now that it's won it, you see like University of Connecticut recently performed it. I mean, Notice performed it a couple of years ago. So basically, I'm kind of rambling, but the idea that I wanted to get across was that you can do something different when it's a recording. You have different options when it's a recording. You can use auto-tune when it's a recording. I mean, you can do so much. You can use delays. You can use the glitches inherent in the software itself. So, for example, like, a lot of people have been writing pieces for Zoom calls because it's the pandemic, right? And there are a lot of people who say, well, okay, there's all this delay, so I'm just going to make an aleatoric piece. And so I guess there's this famous quote by what's his name? I don't remember his name. He's a famous chess player, where he says, look for a good move, then find a better move. And that's kind of what I try to do, where it's like, okay, the most obvious thing is to make an aleatoric piece. But what if instead you wrote a piece that intentionally smears the audio between people? Maybe think about it. If you have a giant glissando and everyone's delayed, you're going to get a giant smearing effect across the frequency spectrum. So things like that, which I haven't actually written a piece like that, but the idea came into my mind. I don't know. And things like that, where I'm just kind of trying to re-examine what can this instrument do? We're so used to it doing one specific thing or a set of specific things in all sorts of contexts. and you can think about it even in terms of like diversity and either ethnic diversity or cultural diversity. You know, like for example, one of my good friends is a choral composer, and everyone was always expecting him to write spirituals and gospel music because he's black, but he didn't want to do that. He wanted to write. I mean, I'm sure if he wanted to, he would, but a lot of his output is much more mainstream kind of contemporary choral music. So even questioning those assumptions that we make, I think can help us broaden what we do as composers. So I know that probably doesn't answer your question in a really specific way, but hopefully it answers your question in a little bit of a broader way.